we're going to do two things. We're going to write to a file, and we are going to read from a file, okay? And so if we write to it, and they're basically going to be similar. So writing to file is the same thing as, rather than writing to the screen, we're going to put our output to a file. Do you get it? So rather than going to the screen, we're going to write to a file, okay? So the first thing we're always going to do is we're going to open the file as an output file. And I'll show you how to do that, and that's very language specific. And then we're going to do our write, and then we're going to close the file. And this is a, just if you don't do this, it happens automatically, but we should do it. I don't always do it. This is, you know, so as I say, not as I do here. Okay, so let's take a look at the following code. First of all, I'm going to need, and again, this is very language specific, so this is not something you would have to answer on a quiz. Also, I'm going to show you what I expect you to know how to be able to do on a quiz. So we're going to need a new file for including, and that's called fstream. Anytime I do file I/O, I need to include fstream. Everybody see that, okay? Fstream, it's for files. So now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have to create a, I call it a handle, to the file that I'm going to use, okay? I can name this guy whatever I want. The name's a variable, okay? But if I'm going to write to it, I have to say that it's of type OFstream. The O stands for output, okay? So this says I'm going to have a guy that is going to point to an output file. It doesn't do anything yet. And all I'm going to do is write to that file, okay? O is for output. All right, so the next thing I have to do is I have to take this handle, which I've declared to be an output handle. I've got to open the file, and this guy, what do I call that guy here with all the junk in it, with the colons? What do I call that? The path or the ad, okay? So that tells me exactly where the file is. That file had better exist, okay? Otherwise, I'll get an error. And then now that file is open, and it's blank, because whenever I open a file for writing, I clear it out, okay? And now, wait, what does this guy look like? What does that command look like? It looks a lot like a cout, doesn't it? But rather than going to the screen, where is the hello and the endl going to go? To the file. So do you see the difference? But it's very similar to the cout. So the cout writes to the standard output, which is the screen. If I want to use a file, I do these two steps, which is to set up a handle, open the file. I never use the name of the file again. I only use the handle, okay? And now all my output will be directed to that handle. You'll have all these with you. You don't have to memorize this or anything, okay? I just want you to understand this, okay? Now, I can write anything to a file that I could write to the screen. Yeah, questions? Fstream or the handle? Okay, so this guy, so we typically include IOStream because we use cin and cout, right? If we use cin and cout, I must include IOStream. Those are the, cin and cout are defined in IOStream, okay? This guy, OFstream, is defined in that header file called fstream. So we haven't talked much about header files, but header files have basically information needed in the language that there's a math header file, there's a graphics header file. So if I'm doing something specific, I may need to pull in different header files. We've always been using IOStream because it includes cin and cout. Now, if I don't do cin and cout, I don't need IOStream, but I almost always do. Yeah? Yeah. Well, that's actually a good question. So if I'm opening a file for output, if I'm going to write to the file, there's two scenarios. One is the file doesn't exist. Okay, so what do you think happens in that case? If I open a file for output and the file doesn't exist, what do you think happens? Creates it. Creates it. Okay? All right. The second scenario is the file did exist and it has junk in it. What happens in that case? This is important, guys. Make sure you understand this. I open a file for writing. output. Open a file for writing. There's two scenarios. One, the file doesn't exist. That's fine. It creates the file, opens it, and it's ready for me to write to. The second scenario is the file does exist. What do you think happens when I open it for output? It clears it, blanks it out, so be careful. Clears it, blanks it out, and writes over the whole thing. Okay? All right? Now, the second thing that we do, and I'm going to go over this again. I just wanted to give everybody sort of the bare bones today. The second thing we do is we read from a file. Okay? So in this case, I'm going to input from the file. All right? Now, I'm going to do a similar thing of opening, like I did for output. But guess what? Rather than using OF stream, what am I going to use? IF stream for in file. That says the file's opening for output versus the file's opening for input. So we're basically specifying whether we're going to write to the file or read from the file. Okay? We're then going to read the data, and that command is going to look very similar to, who can guess? Cin. Okay? And then we're going to close the file. So if we take a look at the actual code for this guy, again, we found include fstream. Okay? This time, we create, this can be named anything. This is your variable name. But this time I say that it's of type ifstream because this time I'm inputting from the file, or reading. Okay? Ask me in a second about whether there exists. I'm opening the file, again, so that looks all the same, right? Opening the file with the full path name. And then this time when I'm inputting, I use the handle that I used to open it. Notice I declare it here as input, assign it to the file here, and then use it for all my input operations. Now, the good news is when I'm inputting from a file, I don't need to prompt. Let me say that again. When I'm inputting from a file, I don't need to prompt. The file's stupid. I don't need to say, please enter data, right? Whereas from a user, I need to say, please enter the following. But when I'm reading from a file, I just take it. Now, what is this? There's a couple things going on I want you to think about here. First of all, if I'm reading from the file name and age, what had better be in the friggin' file? Name, which is of type string, a space, and then age, which should be of type numeric, right? Probably integer. So when I set up the file, it better have the data in the right format. So I don't have any flexibility here. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, so I could certainly read from multiple files. They just have, each one would have a different handle. Yeah. Yeah, you can do that actually. Wait a minute, not handle, file name. So let's say you want to run, we won't do that here, but let's say you want to run the program and you want to have the user tell you where the data is. So yes, you can do that. And you would be inputting the file name then, and path. Brandon? No, that's just a comment, just so you see. Okay, so now let's think a second here. When I go to open this file, now we saw what happened when I went to write to a file and it wasn't there. I'm sure you can all tell me that. Okay? We'll go over that again on Tuesday. But I want you to think now, if I'm going to read from a file, what happens if the file is not there? This ain't good, right? Because all my code below is expecting the file to be there. So I'm going to need to put a check in there, and I'll show you how to do that. Because if I'm reading and the file isn't there, I have to pretty much stop. Right? There's no file, I can't read. Whereas when I was writing, if there was no file, it created it. But if I'm expecting a file to be there and I'm reading from it and I can't find it, you've got to add a check here. I don't have it here. I'll show you how to do that. You've got to check for it.